After a successful season, the MSBY volleyball team had a few days off to rest. Since everyone usually left for a few days, SakuAtsu and Atsumu also wanted to spend their vacation somewhere else. Atsumu, who was only used to party vacations at the beach, had left it up to SakuAtsu to plan their vacation. Since Atsumu had never really been hiking in the mountains, SakuAtsu wanted to show him this part of nature. At first Atsumu wasn't too thrilled with the idea at all. He didn't see the point behind doing this. Why should they exercise when they had just gotten time off from that? What was so relaxing about hiking up a stupid mountain when they had to exert themselves so incredibly? What in the world would be fun about hiking up, only to have to walk all the way back down again? Was Atsumu prejudiced? A teeny tiny bit. But SakuAtsu's puppy eyes wouldn't let him say no. He had planned everything so thoroughly and was looking forward to it so much that Atsumu couldn't cancel on him now. It would break his heart. So here he is, in the mountains, with SakuAtsu, in the shittiest weather it could possibly be. Day 1. Oh me, it's raining. Atsumu looked at SakuAtsu in annoyance and groaned. SakuAtsu giggled and packed some snacks and water bottles into their backpack. What, are you made of sugar? You seriously want to go out in that kind of weather? I don't mind a little rain. Just wait and see, the sun will come out by noon. Atsumu sighed and pouted. He had no chance to stop SakuAtsu from his plan. I wished we were somewhere at the pool and I could drink a coconut kiss, just lie around lazily and enjoy the sun. You would be pacing around annoyed exactly after 5 minutes because everything would bore you. But I would have my coconut kiss and sun. SakuAtsu giggled, walked over to Atsumu, and grabbed him by the waist. He pulled the smaller blonde boy close to him and planted a kiss on his forehead. If you stop pouting, you'll get a coconut kiss from me. Atsumu's big honey-colored eyes looked into SakuAtsu's dark, almost black ones. He thought about it for a second, then frowned and tilted his head, looking at SakuAtsu in confusion. Coconut kiss or coconut kiss cocktail? SakuAtsu chuckled again. He pressed his lips gently and with a lot of passion on Atsumu's. Then he whispered, their lips still closed together. Whatever you want. Atsumu blushed deeply and gave SakuAtsu another quick kiss. He whined once more. We could just stay here. SakuAtsu grinned, poked Atsumu's nose, and then broke away from him. Nope. I have a few things planned to show you. Come on, let's go. SakuAtsu reached his hand out to Atsumu and looked at the blonde expectantly and full of anticipation. Atsumu groaned and then plodded with heavy steps to SakuAtsu. Fine. The two arrived in a gorge, the rain literally pouring down on them. It was cold, wet and above all abandoned. Atsumu ran ahead and looked with wide eyes at the river, which streamed down next to them. They walked on a narrow path between the cliffs, which was secured with a barrier, so nobody could fall into the river. The rain pelted down on the rocks. Oh me. Atsumu was totally excited. Suddenly he didn't even care that the weather was actually pretty miserable. His hands were intertwined with SakuAtsu's. The blonde was practically dragging him behind him. Atsumu's eyes sparkled at the sight of the gorge. The further they walked in, the more stunning the view became. Look Omi. So much water. SakuAtsu chuckled. Atsumu acted like a little kid getting in touch with water for the first time. He leaned over the railing of the narrow path along the river, the rain pattering down on his hood. Atsumu beamed all over. He had never seen anything so breathtaking. They walked up the river a bit more. The path led through a small tunnel inside the cliff. As they exited again, they were overwhelmed by a stunning view. Streams flowed together everywhere, forming small waterfalls, all flowing into the river down the walls of the cliff. It was a spectacle. SakuAtsu grabbed Atsumu's waist and pulled him a little closer to him. He hugged him from behind and rested his chin on his shoulder. His face tilted slightly towards Atsumu. SakuAtsu smiled, the sparkle in Atsumu's eyes making him insanely happy. Beautiful, isn't it? Amazing. The view was stunning, but the thing SakuAtsu admired the most was already in his arms. The blonde man who was sparkling with his big honey-colored eyes, thrilled by the scenery in front of them, who was overwhelmed by what stupid hiking could reveal. I love you Atsu. Atsumu chuckled and turned slightly to his side. He looked SakuAtsu in the eyes, their faces only inches apart. A light pink colored both Atsumu's and SakuAtsu's cheeks. It was raining. It was cold and wet. Actually not the kind of weather Atsumu liked at all. No one could have pushed him outside if it wasn't for SakuAtsu. Atsumu kissed SakuAtsu gently, softly, and with passion. His heart beating hard, his cheeks growing redder and redder. He leaned more into the taller man's embrace, feeling his closeness, his warmth. They ended up being soaked. But all that was perfect the way it was. I love you too, Omi. Day 2. Today the weather was a bit more settled. There were some dark clouds in the sky, but it didn't rain. The sun also made its way through the clouds every now and then. It wasn't too warm, but not too cold either. How much further, Omi? We still have to go up a few meters. I think about 20 minutes. 20 minutes? I'm dead. Omi, my legs are so heavy. Come on Atsu, we are almost at the top. You shouldn't have pushed me so hard during practice. Atsumu groaned, but continued to walk up the path. Each further meter of altitude caused him more trouble. He was already totally out of breath. SakuAtsu felt bad. Atsumu really had a much tougher workout as a setter than he did as a spiker, especially since SakuAtsu kept asking him for a few extra sessions after their regular practice. I'll make it up to you once we reach the top. Whatever. SakuAtsu chuckled. Atsumu could have just turned back and walk all the way down again, but the blonde was ambitious enough to walk all the way up the mountain by now. The way up led past many small creeks that crossed their path over and over again. They were surrounded by trees and bushes that barely let through the sun's rays. Atsumu wiped the sweat from his forehead. He could already see the clearing and smiled. Look Omi. He pointed at it and picked up the pace a little more. SakuAtsu was gasping for air, but he kept up with Atsumu's pace. Man, that guy had some stamina. Atsumu reached his hand for SakuAtsu's before the last climb and gave him his widest and warmest smile. SakuAtsu looked at him with wide eyes, then smiled back. His heart melted. Whenever Atsumu looked at him like that, he could do what he wanted. SakuAtsu would simply always become weak for him. His heart beat fast, on the one hand, because of the exhaustion from hiking, on the other hand because of Atsumu. SakuAtsu blushed and reached for Atsumu's hand, fingers intertwined. Then they fully walked up together, finally arriving at the top. Whoa! The two were overwhelmed by the view they had from up there. They were surrounded by a mountain range. The clouds caught in them and left a white grey misty veil. Single rays of sunlight forced their way through, but most of them remained behind the clouds. As they were on top of the mountain and went up pretty early, they could see the sun rise. Atsumu's eyes sparkled. He was amazed. Did I promise too much? The blonde shook his head, speechless at the scenery that surrounded them. SakuAtsu and Atsumu walked down to a more secluded spot, hands still intertwined, and then sat down. They let their gazes wander into the distance, just enjoying nature, enjoying the sounds coming from the water, the wind and the animals. Atsumu leaned his head against SakuAtsu's shoulder, still grinning and overwhelmed by nature. SakuAtsu chuckled, placed a kiss on Atsumu's forehead, and then leaned his head against Atsumu's. This is so beautiful Omi. Almost as beautiful as you Atsu. Atsumu chuckled and looked SakuAtsu in the eyes, his cheeks colored a soft pink. That's so cheesy. SakuAtsu cupped Atsumu's cheek and stroked it gently and lovingly. He lifted Atsumu's chin and pulled him into a kiss that was full of love. SakuAtsu giggled into the kiss, their lips still touching, which made Atsumu smile as well. If it makes me see your flattered face, then feel free to call me cheesy. You are such an idiot Omi. I love you too. Atsumu kissed SakuAtsu one more time, this time a little longer, soft, and gentle. As they broke away from each other, Atsumu gently stroked SakuAtsu's cheek and stared into his eyes, his smile never fading. I'm glad to be here, with you, Omi. SakuAtsu's heart beat faster and faster. After all the time he'd already been with Atsumu, the faux blonde just kept managing to throw him off track. SakuAtsu smiled. So am I. Day 3, 5 more minutes Omi. Atsumu sipped his coconut kiss cocktail while having slices of cucumber on his eyes and letting the aloe vera mint mask take its effect. He took off a slice and glanced over at Kyumi, who was half asleep in his lounger, his iced chocolate placed next to his table. Atsumu smirked, taking the cucumber slices from his eyes and placing his finished cocktail aside. He straightened up from his lounger and tried to reach for Kiyumi's iced chocolate when he suddenly slapped Atsumu's hand. Hands off, that's mine. How in the world you're slurping? Kiyumi also took off his cucumber slices and tilted his head to Atsumu, who looked at him pouting. They both wore a blue terracloth hairband to prevent their hair from touching the mask. You're too greedy, Atsumu. I just wanted to taste it. Sakusa rolled his eyes. How could he possibly resist Atsumu's puppy eyes? That's just impossible. Just tasting. Atsumu was beaming all over his face as he was allowed to sip Sakusa's iced chocolate. The tasting ended with Atsumu drinking almost all of the iced chocolate, which left Sakusa pissed off but somehow amused. Atsumu really is a little kid at times. Come on Omi, let's wash off the masks and go sliding. They have this huge new tube slide. Atsumu grabbed Sakusa's hand and pulled him up. After the 2 exhausting days, they went to the hot springs, which had added a slide paradise with 50 different water slides, and Atsumu was eager to test every single one of them today. Sakusa told Atsumu that they would go hiking again today, but in fact he had planned the visit to the hot springs from the very beginning. He knew how hard Atsumu had to practice as a setter, and that Atsumu was working out even harder because of the extra time he spent practicing with Sakusa. Training was much harder for setters and Sakusa knew that hiking would challenge Atsumu much more than himself. So he wanted to spoil his boyfriend on the last day of his vacation and spend the day relaxing in the hot springs. The faux blonde should do whatever he felt like. Sakusa wanted to pamper him properly. Atsumu deserved that. The 2 spent half the day in the slide paradise, testing as many slides as they could. Not only Atsumu, but Sakusa had a lot of fun as well. Sakusa was walking past a water pool when he turned back to Atsumu and suddenly noticed a push from the side. Before he could realize everything in time, it was already too late. Sakusa stumbled into the pool and fell into the water. He dove back up and looked at the person who had just pushed him into the water. His annoyed gaze met the honey-colored eyes of his boyfriend, who was crying from laughter. Atsumu held his stomach and wiped away the tears that had welled up. Bataha, you should have seen your face. That was so funny. Sakusa's look was still pissed, but now had a hint of ambush in it. He smirked and now swam to the edge of the pool. He heaved himself out of the water, his smirk growing wider. Sakusa straightened up and locked his gaze with Atsumus, who now startled and looked fearfully at Sakusa. Sakusa spoke softly in his deep voice, almost threatening to Atsumu. Oh, I'll show you what's funny in a sec. Naomi. Stop. Atsumu ran away from Sakusa, the 2 of them having a chase all over the hot springs. Atsumu had to laugh so hard that he struggled to run away from Sakusa. Omino. Sakusa caught up with Atsumu and was now ready to sacrifice everything. He ran up to the blonde boy, grabbed him from behind, and then pulled him into another pool. Sakusa fell backwards into the water, dragging Atsumu with him. Before they dove in, Atsumu held his nose and closed his eyes tightly. Then they were covered with water from head to toe. As they came back up, Sakusa wiped his curls from his face. He grabbed Atsumu's waist and pulled him close. Atsumu swung his arms around Sakusa's neck and chuckled at him. You get what you deserve. And what do I do to deserve you? Sakusa looked perplexed at Atsumu for a minute at first, then shook his head and smiled. His cheeks were dyed a deep red. Atsumu laughed. He loved seeing Sakusa like that. Sakusa nudged Atsumu's nose with his own, his gaze moving from his eyes to his peachy lips. Just look at you, Atsu. You deserve everything you are craving for. Atsumu blushed hard. He brought their faces even closer together, their lips almost touching now. Kiss me? Sakusa smirked. Of course. He locked his lips with Atsumu's, their hearts both beating faster and faster. Atsumu had everything he wanted in his arms. He didn't care where he was or what he was doing, as long as he had Sakusa with him. He was happy. Sakusa made him happy. He loved this man from the bottom of his heart. After a 3-hour drive home, Atsumu had already fallen asleep in the passenger seat. It was the middle of the night when the 2 arrived back at their home. Sakusa looked over at Atsumu, really not wanting to wake him up, since he was sleeping so peacefully. Sakusa chuckled. Cute. He got out and walked to Atsumu's side, then opened the door, leaned over Atsumu, and loosened his seatbelt. Sakusa placed Atsumu's arms around his neck and then carried him, bridal style, from the car home to their bed. He laid the blonde boy down and was about to release his arms from his neck so he could still unpack their stuff when Atsumu tightened his grip. Sakusa looked at Atsumu with wide eyes. Cuddle. Now, Atsumu mumbled, half asleep. Sakusa chuckled, his face all flushed. He placed a kiss on Atsumu's forehead, then laid down next to him. The blonde fixed his position and rested his head on Sakusa's chest, listening to the dark-haired man's heartbeat. Atsumu snuggled even closer to Sakusa, making him blush quite a bit. Sakusa moved his hand through Atsumu's hair, which made the blonde purr. He mumbled, still half asleep. Thank you for those wonderful days, Omi. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Atsu. I love you. I love you too. And so, with all the sweetness and love they felt for each other, having each other tightly in their arms, the two dozed off.